Plenty over there.
Yeah, plenty of them.
Go for the packet pens.
Fernando is here.
Should we start?
Yeah. So you go or? You go?
Yeah, sure. Start. Should I close the door maybe? Hello, welcome everybody. You have, ended up in the operational security working group. I hope that was your intention. If not, it's very nice weather outside also, so you can also enjoy the wonderful things of Berlin. So going to the next page here. So before we kick off, there are like a few administrative things we need to figure out. So the blue sheets are being, they're going around right now. Now, there is a little bit of an unfortunate situation about them. There is no hard plate on the back of it. So the ones sitting at the seats, you probably will have to, be creative. So our apologies for that. So like two other things. Now, before we can start with the working group session itself, it would be wonderful if we have a scribe and somebody is willing to volunteer for taking the meeting minutes in the tool. Anybody willing to volunteer?
I can do it with the recordings, it's okay. But since I'll be presenting and stuff, probably I will not be able to do everything like what people speak.
Okay,
Soon enough, then I will cover you.
Yeah, okay.
Yeah.
So that's for the minutes. So anybody willing to follow the Jabbers, the Jabber channel?
Okay, thank you.
Thank you. So going forward, we also have the Notewell, which you have probably seen already a few times. Since the last IETF, we have updated it on this slide here and for the last version. I'm not the lawyer, so I have no clue what was the difference between the one before the last one and the last one, but take it into account. It's important. And then I believe we go to the agenda. Oh, the door is locked.
Inbound traffic is forbidden by security policy. You should know this.
Yeah, it's a reflexive door.
Yeah.
So we do have an AD here.
Yeah. Or stateless even in this case, right?
You want to know this one? Okay. So just a quick recap. At IETF 95 in Buenos Aires, we had like 2 sessions. They were like pretty densely packed with documents and with information. So that went all pretty well. Now, as a result of that, at this point in time, we have like 2 active working group documents: the extension header filtering for V6 and the V6 document, which will be discussed here as the first topic in our agenda here. And we also ended up with one, relatively active document to do with the IPv6, threat model elements. For the rest, we didn't really have any documents going towards IESG and no other, big disasters or, progress which actually happened, within the operational security working group. Also, as an observation, the discussions in the working group list, it can be improved, I think. And I know I would actually like to ask the working group also if people commit to actually, do reviews of drafts, during one of these sessions here, to also come forward and execute on those reviews. It will be appreciated by the members of the working group, and also particularly by the, by the authors of the documents. So going onwards. So agenda bashing. So this is the agenda, what we have set up. We have 3 topics today. Any comments, any suggestions, any requests for modifications? Please speak up. Nope. Okay, then we have an agenda.
Yep. And you will know that we have plenty of time, so discussion are more than welcome, and we can go over the 20 minutes per slot easily. Okay, so I would advise the author basically explaining as well what are their draft about, the document about, so newcomers can understand what we are talking about as we have time. Okay, Marius, are you here? Marius, are you here?
Maybe the door is locked.
He's in Japan, but it's difficult this time he's here.
He was in the building.
Okay, I don't even know his face, so anyway, we can change the agenda. So it's not Marius, she's not Marius. Yeah, we're looking for the speaker, but okay, anyway, I guess we will simply switch the agenda. So is it working? Yeah. So that's a draft which has been here for many years, which is about operational security for an IPv6 network, and basically how we can securely operate an IPv6 network. It has been running since 2012. Usually a good amount of interaction. What we changed into the latest revision, which is 09, is basically adding some references to new documents, notably the one from Fred Baker about the hop-by-hop extension headers, which was a major threat usually on network. But Fred's proposal is basically changing the behavior. In the change, if you have nothing configured on an interface that requires the inspection of hop-by-hop extension headers, pretty much like RSVP, for instance, you do not need to inspect it. So that's a proposal there. Added as well new references to existing document, and I was talking at some point of time into this document about a NAT64, mainly from the stateful point of view, but we see more and more deployment of stateless NAT64, specifically in IPv6 only data center. So we did a brief sentence on this. I mean, for the security aspect, it doesn't change a lot. Thanks to the review of many people, a lot of typos has been fixed, so that's good. And then we asked mid-June for comments, because in Buenos Aires, 3 people, including a guy called Fernando Gont, just in front of the row, promised basically to review the document and send comments. We received comments from Leah Watt, Fred Baker, and Marcus, and a few others. Now, to be honest, as an author there, I was running out of steam due to vacation, preparing this and so on. So I was unable to act upon all the comments. So I stopped briefly just before Leah Watt's comment, which is pretty long. So, deltas. And basically, they are already in the 09. And I just want to be sure that the change we made there to comply with the review of others still kind of got the consensus in the group. One part was that we said at the beginning that IPv6 numbering is doable, but in practice, impossible to do. We change it into, in practice, it may be extremely difficult to remember, except if you have a good IPAM, because then indeed it comes a little bit easier. We changed a few things as well regarding the ownership of an address and text regarding law enforcement agency that can tell you basically who is this address and how can we block an address to do blah, 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 blah. So we added two qualificative there, administrative ownership of an address and who is technically responsible. Could be very different. We remove the text about law enforcement agency and simply add the text because not only LEA can ask you to shut down some traffic, but you as well, as an operator, you want to do it on your own in case of whatever incident there. So I don't think they are critical. Again, if you don't agree with the change, that's now mostly or never. So neither Eric Klein nor Lorenzo Coliti are here in the room because there's a favorite topic of them, of mine as well. When we talk about ULAs, there we have added, we were never pushing forward ULAs in the text. We added the statement in blue there. It's also important to note that the IETF does not recommend the use of ULA and NTPv6. Now, as an author, I'm afraid that I do not know exactly where this sentence email is being set. Fernando.
Fernando, I think there's, I don't know if it's active, but I think there was a document in V6OPS about the usage of ULAs.
Yeah,
that
right.
might be interesting. To be honest, I haven't been, tracking it, so I don't know if it has been dropped or it's like still being pursued, but might be useful.
Yeah, it's already, the usage of ELA is already referred by this document. But the last sentence that the IETF does not recommend the use of ULA and NPT, I hate to write this sentence into a document without having as reference. So if anybody knows about the reference or to find it, I use Google, sorry, but I wasn't able to find it.
Don't they say anything about the ULA usage document in V6OPS?
I don't think it's in this document. It's in,
Okay.
I mean, I was told, who was telling me? Oh, I think it was Lorenzo that the IETF has said this, but if it's on the mic, Joe.
Joel Yigley, this is literally like one of the most fun things you can try and get a recommendation on out of any group in the IETF is what and how to do things with ULAs. So, yeah, I mean, finding a consensus position there that's like that you can point to in this document is not likely. So that means, your position should be in this document.
Okay. So basically what you suggest, you say, it's also important to know that the authors of this document do not recommend. But it's kind of lowering, watering down.
I think that sounds like a strong position. You don't recommend it. Sounds like a good thing, right?
Okay.
From my vantage point. There are other people in the IETF who disagree. And that's part of the reason, like, having a consensus that says you should not do this, right, is a little bit challenging, right?
Jelinko, sorry, I think I read previous version of the draft. So are we talking about explicitly saying we do not recommend use ULA combined with NAT, not just don't use ULA, right?
That's correct.
Okay,
That's
so
correct.
because it wasn't actually clear from the slide.
It's just one sentence of a long
because
paragraph.
And you do not recommend ULA, you don't recommend NAT. The question is probably we are not recommending using them together, right?
That's correct.
Okay.
That's correct. Did you take note on this? Thank you. Only 2 minutes on this topic. Okay, strange. I was expecting to buy. Privacy addresses. We added the sentence, I think it was Eric Klein proposing it, that .1x can indeed, with reduced accounting, user accounting, can also log the use of IPv6 addresses and a username, so which is good. Now, I've been told by Klaus Viranga that when you're using structure like eduroam, you will get the username being anonymous, so which does not really help. So we need to change the text there around it as well. Stateful DHCP list. So at some point of time, we were telling, yeah, DHCP is kind of cool because you get a static IPv6 addresses. even it doesn't help so much about finding ways using this v6 address. But of course, if you want to use the static v6 addresses per user, you need to be sure it's always mapped to the same MAC address and to the same port on the switch. That's the reason why we added data link security is pretty much like .1x. So, next step for us, the three authors. We really want to get this moving and acting on all the comments. There is also one complete section which is about extension headers, which is currently 3 letters, TBD, which is of course a little bit too small. I would like to refer to your draft, and I would love really that after me you explain a bit more what's inside. The only thing I want to do is really make a difference in this document between transit provider, that in my opinion say should not touch extension headers, except extension headers that are damaging to the infrastructure, and enterprise edge, middle box, firewall, or whatever, they should more approach a whitelist approach. I do not know, let's say, mobile IPv6, so I have no reason to accept routing header and destination header on this kind of stuff. Really a whitelist approach, only allowing, let's say, UDP, TCP, ESP, AH, and fragmentation. Again, no recommendation on the exact list, but the recommendation is to use a whitelist approach to drop what you do not need. Brian Carpenter as well sent a lot of comments, like such as removing references to that ID. If you remember 2-3 years ago, there were a lot of discussion regarding NDP and the efficiency of NDP over Wi-Fi and changing timers and the like. Those ID has been merged or something, so we simply remove them. Should we talk about XLAT464? I would say, as we are talking about network operation, and whether you have a native IPv6 application on the handset or Skype, which is v4 only, plus XLAT464 for the network, it changed nothing because it's still IPv6 only or IPv6 only plus NAT64. Okay, so for me, I can cite it in one line, but I do not need to write more than one line. Okay, because we're talking about network here. Other suggestions, should we talk about the privacy section? I don't see how it would fit here. That's about operational security of a network. If we want to say privacy of a network, I don't know whether we can still really apply this, but it should be a different document. So basically those two, I will push it around. But anyway, thanks to Brian for his comment, of course. Then I started to pass the long list of Leo Watt comments. It's about 6 pages. So Lee, thank you very much for sending them. Many of them are about English and typos and suggestions for text, so I'm skipping them, only focusing on the most important point. And one is that he said that this is a draft which is informational, but in some place you are doing recommendation or best practice. So which is not a best practice document. We are not aiming this. We want to be informational, to be simpler. So Lee, do you have any suggestions how we can change this? Or at anybody in the room?
Lee Howard. Well, so we could make it best practice path. That's one thing we could do, and I'd be okay with that. The other alternative is to just word some things differently to say, consider the use of. And make it, be more of a considerations document.
Okay. And I think for this document, it's a little bit too early to call about best common practice, so we need to change the text, I'm afraid. And that's why we started this document in 2012, just before the World IPv6 launch. We were talking about IPv6 is new and new and new and new. On one side, it's no more new. I mean, there are people in this room, at least 5 or 6 I can see, that are used to run IPv6 networks safely for 4 or 5 years now, so it's no more new for them. Okay. but maybe it's still new for somebody which is reading the document, hopefully before deploying IPv6 in their network, not 5 years after. Okay, so I will change somehow the text, but it's still for newcomers in the IPv6 world. So I will keep the new, but change it somehow. And I got some proposal as well for the ULA plus NPTV6 section there. I put one sentence, and I do not want to open this kind of form, so I would suggest that we keep this sentence here. I mean, changing authors rather than IETF. Many English, as I said. Now, there was a section about 3GPP, which basically, it was Yuri writing it a couple of years ago, and we simply cut and paste, because for me, 3GPP is a different vocabulary for the same concept. So, and we need to do some rewarding. So I read between the line that Lee was volunteering to do the rewriting. Thank you, Lee. Okay, and that's it. So my point is that, again, I would love to really to finish this document and get out.
Jelenko, question about section about using multicast and battery lives and so on, right? You, for some reason, do not refer to RFC 7772, which recommends vendors to use unicast arrayed arrays to reduce the battery life consumption. And do you think it should be explicitly said that multicast snooping might be useful feature in this case? Because I have not found any references to it in the document.
Okay, we do. Thank you.
Fernando, it's not that I suggest that you cover this topic, because it might be like, you know, might stalk the document. But when you were covering Savvy, I was wondering, you know, that in some list, or actually in practice, they are discussing MAC address randomization. And I'm curious about, you know, what effect that might have on, well, some of the stuff that we're currently employing. I'm not suggesting that you cover that, because I guess that is like territory that is kind of like unknown to some extent. But I was just thinking out loud about that.
Yeah, this will be an interesting problem, but yeah, as you said, I'm not sure whether I want to get this out. Yes, because I've been working on this for 4 years. So
probably I agree with you with that.
Okay, but thank you.
Lee Howard, you had asked about a privacy consideration section. I tend to think you're right as I look back at the title and the abstract. We might, just because we like to have a privacy considerations, see if there's, so I'm kind of thinking out loud. So for a network operator, what are their privacy considerations? There might be logging considerations of customer proprietary network information, or PII, private, you know, personally identifiable information, which could include, for instance, IP addresses. Especially if they're, you know, FFFE addresses. That sounds like a reasonably short section. So, you know, I'm going to send you text for privacy considerations, and hope that somebody else will post to the list or something and say, hey, I thought of this also might go in that section. As for the 3GPP section, I think my comment was, this was educational for me because I didn't know anything about how 3GPP does this, which makes it really hard for me to try and suggest what it ought to say. Having said that, because I want to support you in getting this out, I will try to find somebody who does know. Wait, looking around. Anybody here know anything about 3GPP? Oh, hey.
He's qualified.
No, I'm not qualified, but I do know something.
I mean, so you are the guy knowing the most in the room.
let me, so you go ahead.
Yeah, I mean, mysteriously, there are a fair number of people in here who've worked for companies that are either members or consumers of their specifications. So, yeah, I mean, I think we should be able to find some input there.
Yeah, fair enough. So thank you for your help. So we expect a fourth author in the draft with all your text. Thank you.
Yeah, also, you know, from perspective that this draft has been active from like 2012, you said. So it would be interesting to come to a closure. So what I was thinking about doing to sort of try to facilitate that, if you can actually spin like, rather quickly like a -10, you check actually with the main people who provided you with comments. And then we do like a short, last working group last call, and then we can actually move this thing forward. So
good.
Marius?
Yes.
Good afternoon, everyone. My name is Marius Georgescu. I'm from Nara Institute of Science and Technology, and I'll be talking about an attempt to build a threat model for IPv6 transition technologies here. So yeah, let's dive in. Essentially, yeah, this is my slide I've been showing a lot in BMWG. Maybe some other people know it as well. Yeah, I'm sure many or all of you know about the lack of backwards compatibility in IPv6 and the fact that we only have like IPv6, 6% of IPv6 preference in like worldwide usage, and that, yeah, we'll have to go through the transition period. And many of you actually probably worked on developing these transition technologies. There are a couple now. There's great diversity, and like it begs the question, like, what are the implications of using these transition technologies? Implications on security of using these transition technologies in a network. I think there are a fair amount of security considerations in one of the RFCs already published, but in at least my opinion and other people I've talked to, there's some lack of structure. That's what we're trying to bring in with this threat model, and we are trying to use the stride approach. We have a reference now. Thank you, Joel, for noticing there wasn't one on the draft, so it's referencing experiences with threat modeling at Microsoft from Adam Shostak. And yeah, that's the main point of the draft. It provides complementary security considerations to RFC 4942. And as collateral contributions, we think this might apply to like protocols developed in the IETF, some of the generic steps that are considered for stride. So now the steps are fairly simple. So first of all, we have to establish the sort of function or detail the function that the transition technology is supposed to be doing. Also, we proposed the way to generically classify transition technologies in the BMWG draft, and we're thinking this generic classification can be reused here because some of the threat analysis data can be reused for multiple transition technologies. Then, of course, we'll have to decompose the technology, look at the subcomponents, look at the subprotocols, and essentially establish more of the attack area. Then the most important part, identify the threats. We will have a stride data flow diagram association that we proposed, some levels of trust, documenting some of the threats in a standardized format, and yeah, look at some of the complex threats that might arise between the combination of the basic threats. And yeah, validation has the last step through some penetration testing or alike. So yeah, this is, I'm fairly sure most of you know about stride, but just to give a quick overview, stride is essentially a mnemonic and a threat classification model, which stands for spoofing, tampering, repudiation, information disclosure, denial of service, and elevation of privilege. And these so the threat classification also gives a rough idea on how the threats can be mitigated, because the desired properties associated, of course, are authentication, integrity, accountability, confidentiality, availability, and authorization. And yeah, just some examples at this level, because we're talking about layer 3, layer 4 technologies. And yeah, you may think, well, how does elevation of privilege will work here? Well, if you get an access to a privileged part of the network, that's elevation of privilege. Now, yeah, in establishing the function, we gave some examples for the generic the categories we defined. So, for example, for dual stack network, the function would be, yeah. Oh, no, this is the generic step. This is the section 5.1 for dual stack transition technologies. So, ensuring a safe data exchange between nodes over a dual stack infrastructure. Now, in terms of the generic categories and how they could be associated with the existing transition technologies, this is so the 4 groups would be dual stack, single translation, double translation, and encapsulation. And this is how some of the transition technologies will fall into these groups. Like we have dual IP layer operations, RFC 4213, and double translation 464 XLAT, and so on. Now there was some discussion. So we received some feedback from Fernando Gont about the DFD elements and how they should be how the elements that were used in Microsoft and the network elements could be mapped. And I guess this is fairly controversial. I don't really know. So this is how I define them for now. If you have any feedback, it's welcome. Now this is how essentially a dual stack model would, or dual stack use case would be. So we will have a customer device that's an external entity, and then we'll have a process that's the dual stack node, and then we'll have a provider data store, which, well, we're trying to connect to. And then we would want to look at the protected assets and the entry points. And the way I said it, okay, these can all be, this is the system, they can all be entry points, and as well every data that's exchanged in the system should be protected. Yeah, again, this is also a thing that can be discussed, and yeah, we would want some feedback on that as well. Yeah, there's the Stride DFD association will associate some of the Stride threads to certain types of DFD elements. So for example, an external entity is prone to spoofing and repudiation threats more than other elements. So I think this can help here as well. So for network elements, that's why it would be very important to clearly identify the relationship between the DFD elements and the actual network elements that go into a transition technology. Yeah, and then from these, you can essentially, well, get a rough idea about the likelihood, let's say, of a certain threat by associating the number of elements with the likelihood of them being exploited. Yeah, now in documenting the threats, this is the format we thought of. So we'll have like some threat ID, which is supposed to be a code, and if there's the need for having that in the IETF, the code could be like I'll show in the next slide, something like IETF TDB, which is threat database, and then some like the code for the protocol, and then some serial number. So I think I went too far. Yeah, and then we will have like some description, like a summarized description of the threat. We will have an association with the Stride elements, because the threat can be potentially associated with all the Stride threat classes. Then some details about the mitigation, so what actually exists so far, or if it doesn't, what should we do about it? The likelihood, which is depending on how you build the DFD, what's the level of likelihood, and this can be like a stepwise thing. It can be low, high, or you can have some intermediary number there. An idea was to use something like CVSS scoring, and then you'll have an expert database of well, an expert analysis, and then some numbers for each of the threats. That can be an expansion of this simple low-high system. And then some validation. So if the threat was validated, yeah, some details about how it was validated, or if it was validated. So these are some examples I took, like that's ARP spoofing. So you can basically do everything except for elevation of privilege. And yeah, there are some mitigation solutions already. Nobody probably wants static ARP entries, and maybe ARP watch is a better one. Now, if you look at some of those basic threats I presented earlier, some of them can be combined to actually have a bit like a bigger impact or a higher likelihood. So yeah, if you combine ARP1, which was the ARP spoofing threat, with neighbor discovery, I forgot which one that was, 4. It's not there. Anyways, so yeah, you could essentially get a higher likelihood of exploitation, and then yeah, you'll have some more information about how you could mitigate this complex threat. So yeah, as for the collateral contribution, as I was saying earlier, so we could have some threat database for the IETF if that's desired. We could also reuse some of these generic steps to actually give some structure to security considerations, which to me at least, and many or some other people I've talked to lack a bit of structure. Like if you have some simple steps like identify the function, associate the technology with some kind of generic category, decompose it, what's I don't know, some sort of diagram, and then look at the threads and try to validate them. So that's about it from me. I now have some questions for OPSEC. So how many people have read the draft? So I know Fernando has, but and Joel. Yeah, I guess 2 people. Okay, Nalini.
Yeah, I have a couple of questions.
Yeah, sure.
Okay. Well, first, it's a good idea, I think, in some ways. Okay. I have some questions about, the devil is in the details.
Yeah, sure.
And how to actually go about doing this. So if you'll go back to your slide. I mean, I think, okay, first, as far as that.
You mean like the
like
general,
what
this one?
is.
Yeah, okay.
Yeah, well, a couple questions right on that one. Okay. We should probably do more on what that is. I mean, I think there's more than that. I mean, I can just right off the top of my head, I can think leakage. People use certain fields.
You mean information disclosure?
Leak, yeah, information disclosure. They leak data, and then 2, confidentiality. Well, it's a matter of opinion, is confidentiality. Let me say that because if it's my network, my data, I'm an enterprise, I own it, I need to see that for certain things. If you're a WAN optimizer, you need to see certain parts of the data. You know what I mean? So there's more nuance than that for confidentiality. You see what I'm saying? I think there's more categories, and I think it's a good, as I say, it's a good idea. I think.
If you have any suggestions for more categories to the stride, yeah, I'll be welcome. But you said leakage, that's definitely information disclosure. Any other ideas?
Well, I mean, the confidentiality.
Confidentiality is the property, essentially, information. Like if you're worried that you're going to have information disclosure, you should improve confidentiality.
Okay,
that's not the category. It's just the mitigation solution.
I guess what I mean to say is like that kind of stuff is like if I see passive monitoring, what I start thinking is like you shouldn't take traces because you can see the decrypted data inside there. And if I own that data, I have every right to see that data. You see what I mean? And so that's not really an information disclosure category. I mean, you see what I mean?
I'm not sure, but we can talk about it later, and then we can talk about it at length, and maybe you take it to the list as well if there's like more to say about it.
Lee Howard, So yeah, we can discuss on the list, but I'm going to discuss it here if we have time.
Yeah, sure.
Because I think Nalini's right, obviously, that, yes, in some cases, being able to see data is appropriate, but it's still a threat. I mean, I think we still model it as a threat, and maybe we need a note saying, and it may be a considerations, a separate section of the document saying there are other considerations where doing some of these things is appropriate. There are times.
Yeah, sure. Right? No, okay. No, I was understanding the Nalini's suggestion as this is not exhaustive, so this is not complete. You can have something that doesn't fit in these categories. So that's what I'm kind of challenging now. Like, do you guys know any thread that doesn't fit here? Because I don't think so, honestly. Like, Stride is a fairly generic way of categorizing threads, and it should be able to do so with every thread. Right, and of course that's a different discussion point. That's definitely
yes.
Like, absolutely, of course, an ISP would legitimately analyze traffic traces. Yeah, that's maybe normal, but I'm saying that's not that doesn't mean it's not a threat. It's a threat, right? So.
Exactly. And that's exactly what I'm saying is it's a threat. It's covered here. It may not be a threat we want to mitigate against in all circumstances.
Thank you.
Yeah.
So one topic of discussion is whether we want this document, which I personally find useful, become a working group document. Now, to be honest, on my side, it's a security document, but it's not an operational security document. So it does not really belong to this working group, but it should be somewhere in the IETF security area.
Sure, like we're trying to find out which working group it would fit best. The recommendation came from Stephen Farrell and also Fred Baker. Like, we were talking about having it maybe in V6 ops, but it doesn't really fit because it's mostly security. So then we said, okay, let's try OPSEC. It might apply, like Fred's point was, does it give mitigation? Because if it gives mitigations, that means it's all it's useful for operators, right? So that was the point of it being useful maybe in OPSEC. Now, I'm not sure. So yeah, of course, the working group has the last decision, and if there's interest in that, sure.
Yeah, the mitigation part is indeed operation. Yeah.
A couple other things. The threat database. Am I getting this, that you're suggesting that somebody at IETF or somewhere maintain this threat database, or are we going to get it from CERT, or I mean?
Yeah, it can be a draft. Like, that doesn't have to be a standard document. It can be like version draft. It can get to version 100 that can be maintained as a draft with just the table with the threads. That's my rough idea of how it can be solved. Not sure. Just like, this is my suggestion.
The reason I have a little bit of a problem with that, because I mean, there's companies that, do like virus checking and stuff. They make a living out of doing that, and it's modified daily. I mean, that just seems like, I mean, I think at a higher level, there's some real good ideas here, but maintaining a threat database when there could be something coming out every other minute. I mean,
no,
that just seems like a lot
it's
of
a
work.
threat. It's not a vulnerability database. That's a completely different thing. This is a threat database. So these are more generic than like you just think about what the threat could be, right? You do an analysis and then you validate it, and that's about it. You know about it. You don't have to look at versions. You don't have to do vulnerability analysis, which is a completely, I think, different thing.
Okay, all right, because I'm not understanding what you meant by threats then. Yeah.
Well, the threats, it's a unmitigated, essentially vulnerability in like the generic definition I know.
I guess like something like.
But that's like protocol, like at protocol level, protocol security. So if you look at the protocol, you analyze inner workings, and then you say, okay, this is a potential threat. And if it's not mitigated, then yeah, it becomes a vulnerability. So.
Sure, like you say, this particular thing is subject to our resource depletion attack, and I'm not going to say what kind of resource depletion. Is that what you meant?
Well, you could specify that if it's like a stateful NAT 6.4, for example,
yeah.
you could specify, yeah, that's one of the threats there, right?
Right,
It's
no,
a-
I'm just trying to
like
understand
a
what, yeah,
yeah, state table exhaustion, right?
exhaustion,
So
yeah.
that's a threat, yeah. That's a threat
And-
that can be in that threat list or database, whatever you want to call it.
Sure, and that's another draft that you propose.
That's,
that-
well, it can be a draft, it can be anything. For now, it's in this draft. It can be
Okay.
moved into a separate document if that's how it's going to evolve. I don't know.
Fernando, a
Yep.
few random comments regarding the database. I have
Yep.
no idea where that would be doable, but probably Joel has a better idea about that. When you were talking about, possible venues, I think that it all depends. For example, if you are just going to focus on something specific, or whether you want to do to produce a generic document. If it was just a generic document, like a model,
Yeah.
without focusing on any technology, I guess SAG could be an option.
No, I see.
Whereas if you're focusing on anything that is specific, I guess, I don't know if it could be here, but it's closer to what OPSEC does than something that is generic. Now, when it comes to the model itself, can you go forward one slide?
Sure.
No,
Two, I guess. This one?
No,
This one?
this one.
Yeah,
So-
this is, we had some bit
so-
of discussion about.
So I think that having something that tries to structure the way we analyze stuff is useful, right? But for me, it's let's say that I trust the stuff that you produce in the IDE, and I say, okay, I want to use it. For me, this slide is the one that is critical.
Yeah, it's very
If
important.
I
Yeah.
want to apply your model to stuff that I'm doing, I need to be able to know how I map something that I find in a spec
Exactly,
or
yeah.
in a network to the model that you're using. And I don't know if I haven't checked the latest revision of the document. It could be totally different. At the time I took a look at the document, I couldn't myself, it could be my fault, but I couldn't figure out how I could map something that I read, for example, from a spec into the model that you have here. And that's the part that for me is critical. I need to be able to automatically understand, okay.
How do you structure it? Yeah.
Yeah, and I think that for me, this is the part that is key. Being able to apply the model, given some technology, being able to apply it. It should be straightforward. Right?
Yeah, yeah.
I haven't read the latest version, so might be that now it's okay. But
No, it's exactly like I put in green. If I don't know if it can, if it's noticeable, but yeah, like diff. I put in green the things that I changed, and I'm still not satisfied. I think it can be a lot better than this, and I don't exactly know how. So your feedback would be good. Other people that want to contribute are welcome as well. So yeah, that's. Thank you.
Yeah, so Joel Yegley again. I wanted to just respond to, I think, a point Nalini was trying to dig into. And I will preface this by saying, despite having been the chair of this working group at one time and being its responsible AD, I'm not an OPSEC person. They just lob requirements at me from the other side of the company. But my understanding of why you would start with Stride or say some alternative model such as DREAD is that you need a way to frame the discussion, not so much that necessarily your problems fit into the convenient boxes, but that it gives you a terminology that you can start from and a way to pick apart the problem. And the variation between the two that I'm mostly familiar with, which are Stride and DREAD, is sort of a way of analyzing starting from where the problem areas might be versus what the consequences are, which is sort of where DREAD starts and then works backwards, which is like looking in the wrong end of the horse as far as I'm concerned. But I think that speaks to what a database is, which is sort of, since you have this category of boxes, you essentially identify where the potential problem areas in the protocol are. And then when you get to the question of vulnerabilities, those actually fit backwards into the boxes that you've created because this vulnerability is associated with this problem area, right? But it's really sort of starting out with a taxonomy of the protocol so that you can identify where the problem areas are. And so the early portion of this and the explanation of Stride goes into okay, so this is our methodology, and then what we actually care about here is mostly the meat of it, which is where are the problem areas. And I hope that's a little clarifying in terms of how this stuff works. Like I said, I'm not an expert in it, but.
Thank you.
Lee, Howard, I've taken a closer look at the document in the last 5 minutes. Stride is based on a Microsoft research paper, right?
Yeah.
Do they have intellectual property rights on it?
I think on the paper, this paper, not really.
And the reason I'm asking is because you don't even have a normative reference to that paper in the document.
I think it's a normative reference, like the one I put in, but I'm not sure. I might be mistaken. But this is an academic paper that they published. That doesn't necessarily mean that's, well, I might be wrong.
Yeah, Julie, I can comment on that a little bit. Yeah, I asked for the informative reference. So it's my understanding that they have not made any claims on the methodology. I think one of the authors of that paper now works for my company. So if I find out that there's something else to that, I will have to file a third-party disclosure, or maybe a first party, I don't know. Anyway, I looked and didn't see any. So that doesn't mean they don't exist, but I did ask that question at some point.
Yeah, that's a good question. Just to try to clarify. So I also wrote an academic paper that was on the same subject. I just tried to bring it here as well and discuss it. From what I know, this is not covered by any IPR. So
I certainly don't want you to think that I think that I don't really like having a formal methodology for doing threat assessment.
Yeah.
So I think I would love to have this. I'm struggling with where I'd like to see, but since the question was where should the work be done?
Yeah, exactly. That's a good question.
Part of my concern is I really think that Stride or another another threat assessment threat model ought to be published as a standalone RFC, probably by SAG would be the place I would think to do it. So we have, here's a way to do threat modeling. Then, unfortunately, where I really think this work is going, right now you've said, here's a way to do threat modeling of IPv6 transition mechanisms, but no, what you have is a way to do threat modeling of everything.
Yeah, I would see this as a collateral, like a big collateral contribution. Yeah.
So what I really want is not so much a methodology, is I want the threat assessment.
Yeah.
Right.
So that's the part that I did here. Like there's a huge threat analysis that I did. So if time allows, please check it out. And I'm sure you have a vast knowledge in V6 Ops. So it's.
I'm sorry. Was that Appendix A?
Yeah, it's an appendix. Yeah.
Okay.
It's an appendix. So it's
obviously I haven't read all of Appendix A.
Yeah. So it's a huge threat. Well, I don't know, threat analysis, let's call it, like a threat list.
So this may be something where we actually need to go solicit specific reviewers who are either authors or deployers of each of the technologies to make sure they, that they correct this, because yes, I've done some V6, but I haven't deployed, I'm not intimately familiar. I haven't done deployment of every transition technology. So I think that's probably going to be needed in order to advance this, but I actually think we probably need the meta document first that we can then refer back to. And so let's have the methodology document separated out
from the threat analysis,
from the actual analysis.
Okay.
Have the model be one document, the results of the model applied to the transition mechanisms be another document, and part of the reason I'm suggesting that is that we can then suggest to, I can go to other working groups and say, hey, have you looked at the Stride RFC, and have you done a threat assessment based on that?
Okay, yeah, that sounds like a good idea. Thank you.
Where is the Scott Bradner,
where's the Scott Bradner?
I mean, the should may, that thing, what is that, that everybody refers to? Of course, it's like, yeah, but I mean, it's like, because like, that's just so boilerplate. Everybody just always sticks that in. I kind of feel like, what you're talking about is at that level with the,
it may be something like that. I'm not sure if everyone would want to, use this sort of threat model, but it may be something.
Did you answer all the questions you had on the last slide?
Oh no, not really actually. So yeah, yeah, I think the last one would be like if writing a new draft protocol, and I'm pretty sure many people here are trying to do that. Would you follow something similar? I think, like, I don't know, can you guys do a show of hands? Like, how many people would? Well, 3, 4, yeah. Yeah, that's it. And I don't know, like the question, or probably the most important one, is would it fit here? Like, which part of it would it fit here? Would it fit more in SAG? Should I go back to Steven because he sent me here? So yeah.
No, I think either you or ourselves, we can bring this topic to the mailing list when everyone is back home.
No,
I think it's
okay.
more time. But the suggestion has been made to make the model in SAG,
Okay.
which I would follow. I mean, I would propose at least.
Okay. Yeah. Thank you very much.
Okay, thank you,
that's
Marius.
it.
Fernando?
Good afternoon. My name is Fernando Gont. I'll be presenting the document on recommendations on the filtering of IPv6 packets containing IPv6 extension headers. This is a working group that I don't remember when it was adopted, a couple of years ago, I think, 1 or a couple of years ago. This is a brief overview of the document. This document is essentially an IPv6 version of RFC 7126. What we had done in that document was providing advice regarding the filtering of packets the filtering of IPv4 packets with options. So this document tries to do exactly the same thing, but for IPv6 packets. Obviously, in this case, talking about IPv6 extension headers and the corresponding options. In the ID, essentially, you find that we go through every single extension header, every single option, and we try to analyze what are the security and operational implications of these extension headers and options, what can go wrong if you actually drop them, and try to provide advice on that. The idea is that based on work that was done in other working groups like B6Ops, we measure some extent of dropping of packets with extension headers. And essentially, the goal of this document is to try to improve that state of affairs. That is, assuming that some nodes are filtering traffic or packets with extension headers as a result of lack of advice, we'd like to improve that situation by providing the correct advice. So what we did for this version, well, first of all, is like we kind of like had run out of steam, and so we are like back into the business of trying to, you know, give this document a last push to progress and publish. We ended up fixing minor, you know, editorial problems, filling up some sections that were missing content. And I particularly think that, well, at least with the current structure, the document is kind of like done. So some things that we know we need to make progress on this, based on other feedback or other ideas that you might come up with. First one is volunteers for reviewing. So obviously we wrote the document, and we like, you know, other people to take a look at the document and tell us if there's stuff that is missing, stuff that we should change, or stuff that we just got wrong, so that we can fix it.
So any volunteer? Okay, Marius? Nalini and myself.
And ideally, I guess that, you know, based on the, you know, on these reviews, and if there are no, let's say, like big changes in the structure or the like, I guess that it could be ready to actually, you know, do a working group last call, I think.
And by the way, it's a short document, right? It's 10 pages or something like that, right?
I don't remember, to be honest. I don't remember.
Fair enough. So my only comment on the document, that's pretty much like I said, talking about mine, is the filtering, whether you are a transit provider or at the edge, is different.
That's actually a good idea, I think.
Or you restrict the draft just for transit, which is fair.
I should say that, I mean, besides me thinking that what you're saying is a good idea, this document tries to be, let's say, as, how should I say it, as open as possible. So probably if it was me, I would be dropping much more stuff than what this document is saying. So this document is mostly like just blacklisting, like saying, you know, this packet you shouldn't let through, like let's say routing header type 0, for example. But to the extent that is possible, this document advises, you know, to let everything through. That begs the question of whether, you know, since the current version, you could say that is more aimed at, you know, transit. That begs the question whether we, for the advice, we should like split it in two. For example, there are cases here where we say, well, if dropping packets with this extension header might break something, no matter what that is, we allow to let the packet through. Now, there's the question of what you mentioned. Well, where are you doing the filtering? So if you are in transit, probably this advice is okay. But if you are more on the edge of a network, probably quite a few things might change here. We would be like more prescriptive, like saying, well, unless you need this, drop it. So I don't know if, let's say we should probably, for the advice on each extension header and option, we should just split the advice in two for all of them, or I'm open to that. I think that is a good idea, but
okay, opinion in the room on Nalini?
Yeah, well, one thing, I mean, definitely, I mean, I can speak from experience. I know operationally, enterprises or domains allow some things that, you know, inside that they don't allow outside. That's definitely true. So that's something to be considered. But the other point you were kind of saying, like, I mean, if an option is going out and it's going to break something, I mean, that's a real loose termination. I mean, why are you sending the stupid thing if it's not for a purpose? You know what I mean? So yeah, so obviously anything it does is gonna disable, or, you know what I mean, something's gonna not happen or happen for that thing. Is that, am I kind of making sense?
What I was meaning, I'm not sure if you're referring to when I said would break something.
Yeah.
What we are saying is like if dropping a packet, well, let's take the example of, let's say, segment routing, right? They are using a routing header. If a device were to block those packets, well, segment routing will break. So if there's something that might break as a result of dropping, we say, no, let this packet through. We don't, at least when it comes to this particular document, it tries to be as permissive as possible. So let's say we recommend to filter routing header type 0, but let the other ones that have been specified through.
No, I understand. I think I understand what you're saying. My point is, if you send an option, it's for a purpose. And if it doesn't do anything, I mean, and so if you drop it, you're going to break or not provide some kind of functionality. Otherwise, why are you even sending it? I mean, we don't send options just because we want to send options. I mean, am I not?
Yes, but then so, I mean, depending on where you are doing the filtering, so let's say more in the transit, you have more of the idea to let everything through. Now, when you are more on the edge of a network, you say, okay, you know, my traffic is not using any options. So why should I let this packet through? So that's the kind of like what, you know, Eric was saying. So when you get more to the edge of the network, it becomes more of a whitelisting thing, that you know what specific traffic you need, so you just allow that traffic. Whereas when you get more to the transit network, well, you don't really know what that traffic is meant for. So you are more permissive, you could say. Like, since Jen is in the queue, as far as I know, Google filters all packets with extension headers. Which packets?
You explicitly say that blocking fragments will break DNS. So we definitely, and your document actually say do not block fragments for DNS.
Yes.
Right? So I think we should be very careful. And first of all, actually, I was coming here to say completely different thing. I'm in general having kind of problem with documents which start listing all existing possible options, because it might be then in 6 months we're gonna get another document which introduce another option. So this document needs to be updated and so on. Yeah. So I actually do not think we need to keep producing more and more like documents summarizing 25 other existing documents and keep updating it. We might need to have a registry or something like that. It probably would be a better idea.
But I mean, if you have the registry, which we have a registry for options and extension headers, where do you put the advice on what you do with that header or option?
I actually think that my opinion is we should clearly indicate what particular option is needed for, and then let people decide, do you need that particular feature or not, instead of giving them advice, block or filter. Right?
Go again?
So, okay, let's say I know that my network for some reason do not use DNS, right? So I don't care if I'm breaking DNS. Okay, so I can filter fragments.
Mm-hmm.
If I know that I have DNS in my network, I might, especially DNSSEC, right? I might want to permit those fragments, right? And so on. So I think all these extension headers should be, in most cases, treated like a protocol, something like we have, like any other protocol number and ETC protocol, right?
But the thing
so
is
if
that
I'm not using that particular service, I can block it, right? If I use it, I will permit that option. I think it's the only recommendation we should give.
But the thing is that at times it's not straightforward what each extension header and option is used for which other thing. Like, for example, there was even, I think it was on Sysban or V6OS, people writing, well, you know, there was this discussion about hop by hop options.
Yes.
And they were saying, well, but you know, that's also employed for MLD.
Okay, so if we don't know what it's currently using for, we should not give recommendation on blocking, definitely, because we don't know what people is using it for, right?
No, what I'm saying is that if you have a registry that lists, let's say, the extension headers and the options, the guy that is making the decision on whether to drop that or not, at times cannot really say, okay, well, this is actually using for providing this and that other service. That's what I'm saying. So if you just provide a registry, like saying option, blah, 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 the guy that has to do the filtering says, I don't even know if I need it or not.
No, I'm suggesting either have a reference where it's defined or explicitly saying which protocol are using it. And then I can look and say, okay, I only need to permit particular destination option because it's used for something, and I can block everything else.
Well, what I'm saying is that at times that's not really straightforward. Like, you know, I mean, this is not the best example, but with router alert, if you go at the registry and say, what is router alert used for?
So you think you can say it in your document, but we could not say it in any registry?
No. What I'm saying is that the registry doesn't say it because it shouldn't say it. It just says, this is the option. That's it. So option, blah, blah, this is the name. This is where it's specified. But with stuff like router alert, for example, it can be used for many things. So at times, if you just look at the registry, it's not straightforward what you might break if you drop packets containing that option. And that's one of the purposes of this document.
We'll take it offline. I think I have not made myself clear. And then the comment, I actually think that introduction is kind of confusing because it's saying that in extension headers could be used for DDoS and other stuff rather than processing software in slower paths. I don't think it's always the case. It might be a case for hop by hop, and it's not actually necessarily a case for hop by hop. It's implementation dependent. So I think we should kind of rephrase it to make it less negative.
Okay.
And probably again, in terms of format, probably we could kind of provide it in the form of the table so it's easier to read.
Yeah.
Because if I'm an administrator who has nothing about all this stuff, I look at this doc, I just filter everything because it's very confusing.
Okay.
So basically, you need a kind of, okay, put this registry in your document. They say, here is the option. If it's used for this, if you block it, it will break this, and let administrator decide. And we should probably explicitly say, if your transit provider, try not to block stuff, right? Let and the system to decide what to do with the traffic.
So that's a a question to you. So what you are saying is that we should clearly state what breaks, but not recommend what to do?
Yes, because I think if I'm using particular service which going to be broken, unless we know that this particular option is not used for anything useful, known to be harmful, and should be blocked, then probably yes. In general, how can we tell people, shall we block or permit fragments if we don't know? It should be their decision.
I mean, actually, for what we have right now in the document, the stuff that we recommend to filter is example, routing header type 0. There's nothing to discuss about that.
Yeah, but I'm pretty sure that for most of the other options, it might be, again, decision based on the security policy. If your security policies permit only things I need and block everything else, they can look and find out what they need. It might be that security policy is actually, I'm only blocking harmful stuff and I permit everything else, and then we should not recommend them to block anything.
Well, that kind of relates to what Eric was saying. So essentially, what we have in the document right now is mostly just blacklisting. Stuff that is known to be harmful, we recommend to block, the other stuff to let through. But at the end of the day, I think that somehow you are agreeing with Eric, which is, it depends on, where you are in the network, you might take one stance or the other.
Yeah, Eric, just to say the registry, which is IANA, I don't think this IANA role is to say or even register a security use case. So this could be useful for you to go there and list all the use, for sure. I'm pretty sure that's what you did. But to put a registry and IANA that says this protocol should be blocked or permitted, that's kind of very, very strange idea.
Mm-hmm.
And to come back on the point, we want to say something recommendation in your draft, in your document, because we want to say to ISP that are blocking extension headers, please do not do because the IETF has agreed on this document, right? So I think it's important to keep it kind of open there and to say and write recommendation.
So you're arguing essentially, just to see if I read you clearly, that we should actually recommend something, not just leave the decision up to the reader.
Correct.
Yeah, I agree with that.
So a couple of thoughts. Okay, Bill Cerveny. One is it would be useful to have this information be machine readable, so that, let's say, a firewall at some point in the future could actually, instead of having someone manually input all this information, be able to access it, which would lean towards having a recommendation whether or not.
Mm-hmm.
Also, in a registry, you could deprecate some options. I would think that the IANA registry would say, yeah, this is deprecated, and perhaps something machine readable could read that.
I had some experience with that.
Okay.
And at times, deprecate, and we have, I think it was endpoint identifier option was an option that was actually never used, as far as I remember. There wasn't even an RFC for it. And trying to formally deprecate that, lots of energy. I'm not saying that that's not the way to go. What I'm saying is that at times it's extremely hard. Not that it should, because obviously it's not that you just email IANA and they say, okay, yeah, we mark it. So there's IETF action that is required for that. And I'm not saying it shouldn't be done. Actually, I think that for some of this, we had while we were working on the options, we had a document. That's actually, I think we never published, and it was done it's in my computer for 2 years, because we were finding options that had no information at all. So at the time they were given, the option number was given to someone. Sure. There was no specification. So we were doing the work of trying to, find the people that were referenced there, because obviously the email addresses were not working. Some of these people you couldn't find. And for some of them, we actually get to talk to the authors at the time, and they say, yeah, this was never used. So we started to work on a document, which now it kind of rises. So I might try to revive that or post it, whatever I have on my computer, trying to actually, those that have never been used, try to formally deprecate them. Now, getting in contact with the authors, I mean, this was, in some cases, this was a long time ago. There are people that now work even in different fields.
Sure.
This is like the experience that we had. But even then, when you get, to do the ID that is required to deprecate this, at times it requires a lot of energy to, for that to be published and the options to be deprecated.
Is there a value to have, let's say, instead of saying deprecated, where you really want to deprecate it, maybe say unknown, say, oh yeah, someone put this there. We don't know what it does. And if you want, you could let this through or not.
Well, but the thing is that when we were, working on the kind of like the same document, but for IPv4 years ago, the sentiment was like, well, if you don't know, you cannot provide advice.
Yeah.
So it was like, well, before you actually say do this or that, you have to be able to tell what's that and if it's used for anything. So that's why we did that for the IPv4 document too, like, trying to find like, using like LinkedIn, Google to try to find where these people were still alive and, where they were still reachable. For many cases, we were able to do that. And I will try to look at because I remember that we were, for those options that, didn't have like clear references, we were, try to get a hold of the authors and trying to ask them, whether that stuff was used or not. We never published the document. I mean, we did it like 2 years ago. We never published it, but I will take a look because it's probably in my computer still.
Okay. Yeah. I mean, the scenario I think of is, let's say someone develops something new that uses a new port or a new extension header option or whatever. If you publish just, let's say tomorrow, this thing in 6 months, it's probably going to see like, a number of years before the firewall headers or firewall people will actually update their information. If there is something in place that's machine readable and there's some way of updating this information, let's say a new RFC a year from now, that somehow someone could reference, that would, I think it'd provide security, but you'd also allow for future developments.
Well,
in the short term. With
the document that we have right now, it is very permissive. It even says that, you don't have to, it follows follows the advice in RFC 7045, which is you shouldn't block unknown options or unknown EH. But that's again, because this is mostly targeted more in the middle of the network. So probably, the best way to possibly answer that is go with the idea that Eric said, because depending on where you are doing the filtering, you might want to do one thing or the other. If you are more in the middle of the network, be more permissive. But if you are on the edge, it's probably more of a whitelist approach.
I'm kind of following up on some stuff that I think that we've kind of been skirting around. I think Bill and Jen were kind of talking about it too. And this whole thing in some ways has a lot of similarities to the thing of Marius. There's a class of problems and information which actually belongs in some type of table that, and it has to be kind of a mandate. You know what I mean? It's like my destination option, which is about to be passed, is not in there. So it's like, it has to be part of the procedure that if you do this, like, yeah, you go to IANA and then you update the whatever you call the recommendations table. And so then it's like, it's always going to be there. And like in the IPPM registry, I mean, we've been going through all this endless chaos about machine readable and what are all the fields in there. I mean, it's been a little bit endless, but it is, and it's going to be IANA maintained. I mean, there's a whole registry for what the metrics are, what they mean, blah blah blah, and I think it's a good thing to do. It's just that unless you develop some subsidiary procedures, both in terms of readability and maintainability. And those are both really good things, I think, for both of you guys. It's great information. I'd love to see something like that, like for DHCP v6 options, or there's a class of information which fits into this kind of thing. Am I making any sense to you?
I'm not sure I follow what's your recommendation here. So that you're saying to keep a registry of what?
Well, what I'm suggesting, I think, is three things. One, you have a set of recommendations that are more generic, like if you understand it, pass it, talking about different domains, topology, all that kind of stuff. Yeah, great. Then there's absolute information about there's this kind of header and then these options underneath there. It's this, and this. You should pass this, don't do that, etc. I mean, right? So there's two different kinds of information in that draft.
So essentially, you have
Yes.
the discussion of the extension headers themselves and the options too.
Yeah. So, but I mean, there's an intro, like if you don't understand it, I mean, what I'm saying is
No,
like,
not understand. So what we do, I mean, when it comes to whether you understand the option of the header itself, we replicate essentially what's in RFC 7045. So if it's unknown, you should pass it. You shouldn't block options that are unknown, etc., etc. What we say is for those that are specified, we try to say, okay, try to summarize what that option or extension header is used for. So that, okay, you found in the registry this option, okay, it is being employed at the end of the day for this protocol, that protocol, and blah, blah, blah. So now you have more information than what you have in the registry. In the registry, you just point to the specification, but at times it doesn't tell you what is actually using that. Now, here we say, okay, this option or this extension header is being employed at the end of the day by all this. Then we say, if you were to drop this, well, this is what would break. Okay? When it comes to security implications, this is what might happen. And based on security implications and what might break, we provide advice. You should drop or you should not drop. That's what we do.
No, I get it. I think I get it. What I'm saying is that the format of the document and the structure around the maintainability of the document might want to be a little bit different. It might want to not be an RFC. I mean, I don't know what it is, but some maintainable document similar to Marius's threat table, because it's going to be modified much more regularly than one expects a draft to be. And it also requires that anybody, I think it should require that anybody who puts in a new option, there is a procedure where, it's like you have to put in there, like, what are the security sections? Like, what are IANA considerations? They should either have to notify you or the secretariat or whoever so that you can add this new destination options, its implications, et cetera, into that. Does that make sense?
One thing that I believe is important, which is, at the end of the day, the goal of this document is to try to improve the state of affairs to what is going on nowadays with extension headers. So besides the specific details, what we are trying here is that for those cases where, networks are dropping packets, which we wouldn't want them to be dropping, to try to provide advice to that. It's not that the document is meant to, like at the minute level, whenever something new goes on, okay, now you should update your policies. But at least to what we have right now, which the level of packet drops that we have, try to improve that. I mean, even I personally think that if with the stuff that is specified so far, we were able to reduce the level of dropping with this document, for me, that's a big goal and I would be done with it. I think that's, from my perspective, the main goal here.
Okay. So if it's outdated in 6 months, then you're good with that, or you're good with updating it every 6 months?
Well, for me, the worst part, I mean, it's not that I think that's something that is nice, but what I'm saying is that we have nowadays a bigger problem, which is that stuff that has been specified a long time ago is still being dropped. And that's, I think, the main part that we want to change, many of us. It's like when we measure stuff that it's not that it has been published like 6 months from now, but ages ago, that's still dropped. If we can reduce the level of those packets drop, particularly the ones that are happening in transit, which are, I guess, the ones that we are mostly concerned. I think that if we can get that to be reduced, that's, I think that as far as I'm concerned, that the goal has been achieved.
Yeah, that's fine. I mean, maybe somebody else can pick up your work and do more later.
Yeah, I mean, if there's eventually something that they want to keep it more up to date, that's fine.
Sure.
So to come back on this registry issue, the more I think and the interaction with sensible questions from Nalini and Jens, I wonder whether you should not restrict your document just for transit providers. So basically the blacklist approach. And the other issue with the registry is that I'm pretty sure that the guy who designed the hop-by-hop extension headers in '95 was not seeing the hardware router coming, which is only issue when you don't process everything in CPU. And the guy writing in '95 the routing header type 0 was not thinking about the attack. Right? So those, meaning it's no point of putting in a registry when you design a protocol to say it's not dangerous, because of course you don't design a protocol that's dangerous.
So what you're saying?
You should at least, yeah.
So what you're saying is that we shouldn't just split the recommendations into transit and edge, essentially just stick to transit and...
It will be clearer for everyone.
Okay.
And it would also prevent operators to be scared and misread the draft.
Okay.
Of the document.
Yeah, Julia, IPv4 source routing was still a thing in '94. So, I mean, you know, there's a lot of bad ideas that we've kind of dispensed of since then.
I think we're done, right? So, yes.
Lemberinghaus. Eric, you just suggested to get the edge part out of this document. But the firewall administrators at the edge are the ones who need guidance. The service providers will eventually let all the stuff through because this stuff belongs to the customers. So they will open their firewalls eventually. But the customers at the edge, the enterprises who now try to deploy IPv6, they fear IPv6 because they have no idea how to implement it, what they can do, what all these headers do to them. So the section with the use cases is very, very helpful to show them what they can use this stuff for. But if you take the enterprise section, the edge section out, then the people who need guidance most get nothing out of this document. And IPv6 is deployed at the edge today. The service providers all have it or should have it.
So I see your point. So I guess the question here, I mean, I see your point, and I think that, you know, that information would be valuable. What I'm personally wondering myself is, if we make the document focus on transit, I think we are like essentially almost done, right? And this document as it is, without the edge stuff, would help, hopefully, to, you know, improve the situation of the level of drop-in that we have in transit. So I guess that two options are, one of them, we split the recommendations in this one. I see in that case people coming and saying, well, but you know, if you are on the whitelist approach, then if something gets published, there will be like a delta there during which the time will, that stuff will be dropped. So one option is to, you know, split the recommendations as we were talking before, and we have for transit at the edge. The other one is doing like in two separate documents, having this one published as it is, targeting or having the goal specifically that we reduce the level of packet drops in transit, and having a separate one that just targets, you know, at the edge. And to some extent that might make sense, in the sense that probably the guy that is configuring the firewall at the edge doesn't care about what the guy doing in transit is doing, and vice versa. So I'm open to, you know, I mean, any of the two options would work for me.
Hi, Tassen Dahm. So I was just listening to like all the feedback and what you were saying and repeating over and over again. And it's actually the only question that didn't get asked yet is, who do you actually expect to read this document? So, I mean, if we go back to like Willem's comments, is what you actually want is, you want to publish a template and say, hey, here is a Cisco template. You maybe don't know what DNS is, and you maybe don't know what it does, and you know nothing about IPv6 and extension headers, but take this template, put it on your Cisco router, your Juniper router, your Checkpoint 501, and your Facebook will work, and you're reasonably secure. And I guess if you really care about this, and if you really care about, you know, enterprises or transit customers, whatever, you're probably having better results by just giving people like these secure config templates on a blog or in a book than actually writing an RC that these people that probably need it will most likely not going to read anyway.
I would be kind of like quite suspicious about someone that would just copy and paste whatever I put in a template. So let's say, I don't know what my specific target is, but certainly my target is someone that will read, understand what I wrote, and then act accordingly. If there's a guy that will just copy and paste whatever, I don't want that guy to read my document.
But that's essentially what's going to happen.
Okay,
Well,
last comment because we're almost in overtime. Actually, we are in overtime.
So I guess my question is, so one of the main questions here is whether we stick with what we have, essentially target this document at transit and publish as is. And when it comes to the edge stuff, we do, eventually we see what we do. The other is whether we split the recommendations in two. Given the discussion, I probably stick to the last stuff that you said, like target the transit, aim at reducing the level of drops. That's my take.
Yeah, I agree.
I agree. We will do it on the list anyway.
Cool.
You can close.
Okay, so it's time to finish. I have only one blue sheet. The other one is? Okay, everyone sign it? So if not, come back and sign it here. And I think it's a break time. Thank you for coming.
We didn't notice.